I created these beautiful paintings using molding paste, acrylic paint, palette knife, brushes, dotting tools, and various other art tools. Stay tuned to learn my techniques. To start off my painting, I needed to choose my colors, and I chose the palette that you see here. I like this color scheme because it reminds me of fall, and now that we are just coming into the heat season in Phoenix, I'm already looking forward to fall. The first step was to mix my teal color, and I actually came out really close to the color shown on my palette. Another thing I did is I actually put down my colors onto this piece of paper here that is really good for experimenting with colors. I ended up mixing cerulean blue with phthalo green, and that was a pretty color, but I wanted to try a few other colors as well to see really what I could come up with. And I tried hooker green, but hooker green was really, really green. It was a bit too much. So what I ended up going with was this bright aqua, and this is bright aqua green by Basics, Liquitex, and I mixed that with cerulean blue, and that particular color was really nice, and I wanted to keep the color tone like a painting that I had seen on the internet before, where they basically kept to two different color tones and added in some white for highlight. So I wanted teal and then a little bit lighter teal. So once I got the teal that I was happy with, then I added a little bit of white to it. And then to gray it down slightly, I added a little bit of unbleached titanium. And unbleached titanium is like titanium white, but it has a slightly yellow tint to it. This is the unbleached titanium versus the pure white titanium, and this is that that light bright aqua green. And then I wanted to have gold tones, and so for that I used the cadmium yellow deep and burnt sienna, and then when I mixed those two together I came up with this nice tone that's right in the middle. So my plan is to have this be my background, and I need to lighten it up a lot. To do that, I will use my palette knife. I'll clean this first, and I'll use my palette knife to add the bright aqua green, and that will lighten this up a lot because I'll do quite a bit of palette knife work on it. But as I get down in here where I'm going to have stems and things coming up, I will use a different stroke because I want this to be looking more like it's the little reeds and flowers, and it's going to be sort of like it doesn't have to be realistic looking, but it'll be sort of like a semi-abstract of wildflowers and things coming up. And I like this tone, and I think set off with the fall colors down here overall, it has the feel of that palette. You can find color palettes like that. If you go to Pinterest and just search color palette, you might find it under Google search as well, but I find a lot when I go to Pinterest. Okay, so I've cleaned my palette knife. Now I should mention I did not use this for painting this canvas. I actually used the palette knife for mixing the colors. And being acrylic paints, they dry fairly quickly, so it's a little bit more difficult, I think, mixing acrylics than mixing oil paints. But I needed to get certain colors, and so I decided to go for mixing. So for right now, I'm just using my palette knife with just the color itself. I didn't mix it or anything. And I will come through and lighten this up some. Now I noticed in looking at my video here, just to make sure it was recording correctly and things, that the image that you see might look a little bluer than what it really looks like. Okay, now I have a little bit of cerulean blue here and some of my aqua, my bright aqua. And the reason is I don't want this to just turn green on me either. So I'm going to come in and add a little bit of a mix. And I also need a little bit of white to lighten some of it up as a different tone. So I'm still using the same colors, but I'm getting different tones now by mixing some other colors in. Now when you first start doing palette knife work like this as a background, it may just kind of look like a big mess at first. If you've watched my other paintings, you'll see that. And that's fine. Now if I get a little bit of pure white in there, I can mix it in and it'll be okay. So in this case, you can either mix 3 separate colors, have some just green like I have here, have an area that is a mix of cerulean blue and green, and then have a third area that's a mix of cerulean blue and green with a little white. I just kind of dip into each one. And I go up to the edge, but I don't really worry about going over the edge. And I only want to come down about halfway. And I can toss in even a little bit more white here and there, just for interest and to keep it light, because I want this to be fall, but I want it to also have some brightness to it. Now the reason that I chose an 8x8 size is because it's about the size of a trivet or a decorative tile. So when I'm finished, I will varnish this and then I'll set it in a decorative photo stand. And I can set it up on my counter in my kitchen or any place around my house. It doesn't take up much space. It's different than hanging it on the wall. It'll just be a nice accent piece someplace for fall. Okay, so now I'm going to start making my strokes be a bit different, more of an up and down type, and it just kind of gives a different feel when I'm coming up this way now. So they're still done with the palette, and I think maybe even I got a little bit of the darker green in there. Now I also want to point out that when I was mixing my teal, one way to create a darker teal would have been to add a little bit of black or gray. So I picked up some Payne's Gray. This is Payne's Gray, and I use Payne's Gray in a lot of my paintings because it's a bit softer than black. The problem is Payne's Gray has a lot of blue in it. I don't know if you can see that here, but it's almost like a super dark navy blue. And that went into the color, and my teal became very blue. So I didn't want that. And I'm getting thinner strokes by using this side. I like this particular palette knife. It's not fancy, it's just an inexpensive set of plastic, but the plastic doesn't get kinked the way that inexpensive metal palette knife would. So it works really well for me, and it cleans up very easily. And I've never really had high quality palette knives. I maybe would change my mind if I tried one of them, but for now this works. By bringing up a few streaks like that, you're kind of adding something that tells your brain that something is different on this end of the painting. Something different is going on here than what you see up at the top. Now the cadmium yellow does not have the opacity that white does. So sometimes it's good to add white with it if you want it more opaque. Now I will let that dry, And then I will come back and add some more things up this way. Now it hasn't totally dried yet. It's still very wet, but I've decided to come back and add a little bit of this at this point. I'm taking my bright aqua and the Payne's Gray and mixing those because I'd like to see what it looks like to start adding another layer of dimension on here. Yeah, now what I don't want to do is just remove what I put on there before. But that's what I could be doing. So you can see though how that starts adding depth. So I do need to let it dry though, or I'll end up scraping off what's just been put down. But that gives me an idea. I do like that. I think that the darker Payne's Gray will add a lot of dimension. So this is a close-up to show you some of the texture. It's actually quite pretty. Okay, this is dried overnight, and I like the overall look of it. I can see areas that need to be reworked a bit. Of course, there's still a lot left to do as well, but I want to take a moment and talk to you about these modeling pastes. This is golden molding paste. It's also called modeling paste. That's the same thing. Liquitex makes one. There are, I'm sure, several brands that make these pastes. And this one is white. It's opaque. And I think I mentioned that the modeling pastes dry clear. That's actually modeling gels that dry clear. When you look at them in the jar, they are a clear transparency. And so that is different than a modeling paste. Now, so you want to keep that in mind. You can see here the original color of the yellow that I used. And I mixed it some with white, but I mixed it mostly here with just the modeling paste when I did these flowers. And the modeling paste did lighten it up a bit. So you have two options when you're working with these modeling pastes. You can either mix the paint with the modeling paste and then apply it to the canvas, or you can apply the modeling paste all by itself first and then come back and paint over it. And also, as you saw when I was mixing it, for me it's a little bit difficult to mix the paint with the modeling paste. It works best using a palette knife, but even so, if you don't get it mixed really well, you end up with some white streaks because the modeling paste has its own color. And you have to mix and mix and mix to get the paint really thoroughly mixed in with the paste. And so it's not really my favorite method. I think that for me personally, it worked fine for doing some of these little pieces here to mix it first, but I think that for certain things, I prefer to put down the paste first and then paint over it, and the paste will dry in about 15 minutes or so, especially in a hot, dry climate like here in Phoenix. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go back and add some lines that will become little reeds and stems and things. This has now dried, but I can kind of go around it. Yesterday when it wasn't dry, I cut right through it. Another thing that I noticed, after I finished yesterday, I took a photo of it, and I really highly recommend that you take photos of your work as you proceed through the project, because you see things in photos that you maybe wouldn't see otherwise. And I noticed right away some little circles. I didn't actually paint these circles in here. It's just the way that when I use my palette knife, it's just the way that it turned out. And so my eye kind of goes to this little area. That can be okay. It can be just sort of interesting little shapes in the background. But for right now, especially in the photo that I took, your eye goes right to the circle. And it's distracting. I don't like that. So I'll keep that in mind today when I go over some of this area. So what I will do next is I will take a clean palette knife and I'll start laying down some plain modeling paste. Okay, now since this has dried, I can use my palette knife directly into my modeling paste. If this were wet, of course, I'd put that on a plate, because you don't want to ever get paint in the modeling paste. So what I'm going to do now is just create texture. I want to have a few more reeds and kind of more of a dimensional look. So I'm trying to keep this so you can see it as well. So you can see how that's putting texture down. I'm going to move it my way a little bit here, just so I can work my palette knife more easily. So you can actually draw shapes doing this. It adds a lot of dimension. And I noticed up in this area, I thought it'd be kind of fun to add something up there. In the photo, this almost looked like some little sprigs of grass. And I think I maybe want to fix that little area that's bothering me first. I'm going to take some paint from the other day, just maybe a little bit left here, and take out some of that. It's just enough then that you don't see an actual spot there. And that's maybe just a little bit too much white up in there though. Tone that down just a bit. I need a little bit more up there. There's always this tinkering to make sure everything is balanced. Some people think that abstract painting is easy. It's really not easy, at least not for me. Okay, now that I have this more how I like it, I can come back and work on this area. And I want to have a little bit of texture up here that's almost like the frayed ends of tall grasses or something. Now you might feel like picking up a small brush to do that, but it doesn't really work with a brush to use modeling paste, because the modeling paste just gets stuck in the brush tips. So it's kind of a different angle here for me, but I don't want to pick this up or you might not be able to see it. So this kind of gives you an idea, and I'll bring the camera up close when I'm finished. I kind of like the looks of this. So you can see you can get fairly detailed with it. It's almost like little points of flowers, and I may have them be a lighter color. But I can come back then later and paint them however I want. Lay it down like this. Now I have a nice raised line right there. And I can do the same thing over here. So this does add nice dimension. So now you've seen painting on the background, which is just plain painting, mixing some color to get the background how you want, then using a palette knife in various directions to create the upper zone, and then using a palette knife with more vertical strokes to lay in the background down here, and then using modeling paste mixed with paint, and now modeling paste by itself and then painting over. The two things left will be using a Q-tip, just because I want to show you what you can do with that. I may add a few flowers on some of these blades of grass down in here with using a Q-tip, and then I have these dotting tools, which are really nice for going back and adding the centers to flowers. And I think they're just kind of fun to work with. Okay, the painting that you see on the screen right now was created with texture that I created using Sherrod Permanent Patch 101 and 102. And it created beautiful texture for this floral painting. I also created this painting of a wet rock wall that is part of a memory I have of the Northwest area. And I highly recommend watching this video. You may not want to paint a gloomy looking Northwest rock wall, but you would be watching it to learn the techniques, because I use joint compound and the permanent patch and also a glazing medium to make the water drips. And you can use those techniques in any type of painting, so watch it even though you may not be drawn to the painting itself, and learn about what you can do. So I have enough going on here now. These yellow flowers sort of go that way, with the exception of one here, so it doesn't, that's just enough to break that up. And then I have the overall line coming this way. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then my background kind of curves like this. These images show the texture up close, and the shadows and things can show you the depth of the texture. So far I'm really happy with this, but I know for sure that for me personally, I prefer to put down modeling paste first and then come back and paint over it. Okay, so this has been about 20 to 25 minutes and it has dried enough that I can paint it. If I wanted it to be thoroughly dry, I would probably give it another half hour or so, because it's just a little bit soft. If I push on it, I could make impressions with my fingernails or something, but it's dry enough that if I'm careful, I can paint over it at this point. So my next step will be to get a little bit of Payne's Gray on my plate. I have my burnt sienna and my cadmium yellow, deep hue. And I can always throw in a little bit of white to change the tones of these, as well as the Payne's Gray. And I can do my usual where I put one corner in one color, one corner of the brush in another color, and that gives me my dimensions. And I can come back and add a little bit of dark inside there. So I'm putting kind of a yellow base just to cover my paste here, but I think that I'm going to come back and add some of that bright aqua. And this I'm just kind of doing little flicks of the brush, because I don't want it looking real perfect. Now, I did bring out a Q-tip because I want to show you what you can do with that. It's just a little bit different. Depending on how you lay down the Q-tip, it gives its own little shapes. Okay, so my idea down here is to bring back a little bit more aqua along with some Payne's Gray. I think that'll add just that added dimension down there that I need. And I can take a little dab of the aqua like this, and just a little flick here and there is about all that needs. And it just brings that in kind of nicely. And then down towards the bottom, I can add a little bit more of the darker. Just really not very much, or all of a sudden your eye will go there. It just doesn't take much. And now I'm mixing the two together. Because I have some dark down here, it might be kind of nice to have a little bit of blue. I had thought I would like white up there, but I have white down in here too, so it's just suddenly it's too much. So now I have my cerulean blue with a little Payne's Gray. That's quite dark, but it's kind of pretty. and just maybe a little bit of highlighting up in there. The brain kind of seeks out balance. Now this is still bothering me, so I still need to work on that some more, but I think I'm kind of starting to get a little closer. I may end up having to add just a hint of yellow up there even. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm going to add the centers to these, and then I'll decide maybe if I put blue in there, I'll be happy. I'm just not quite happy yet. And you can sometimes add one little flick of color somewhere and it just ties it all together, or it may go the other way and you suddenly just really don't like it. It's something is out of balance. There's a lot of blue up there though, so I'm finding that I'm liking adding a little more down here. Okay, now I have my dotting tools. And these dotting tools are all different sizes. Now, you don't have to do this. You can always use a paintbrush or something. But I'm just doing this because I want to show you the different things you can do. So I'll take the Payne's Gray, touch it to the white, put that down, then so you automatically get a little bit of white in there. It looks a little softer than if it was just all black. So these smaller flowers should be a little bit different. I don't want them to be exactly the same or your eye will right away just pick up all these little dots. I want the eye to pick them up but not have it fight with what's there. So instead I'm going to use the burnt sienna with the Payne's Gray. We'll see how that looks. Okay, so I'm still not happy with this area. So now I'm going to try something else. I'm going to dip one corner in the white, one corner in the blue, and see what happens. For one thing, it's not dry, so I may have to wait until it dries. We'll see. I may be able to just kind of touch it up like this, I think. So now what I'm doing is I'm looking to see any place where my eye goes there and thinks there's something out of place. Okay, now the only other thing is if I want to try adding some detail of little tiny lines of Payne's Gray, sort of appear like little stems coming across the bottom there. Okay, so what I'm wanting to do is add just a little touch, tiny little dab of paint that looks like a little bud that you might actually find in a garden. And when you get up close, you can see that these stems don't necessarily go all the way through, and that's fine because it has an appearance then that it's disappearing back behind other things, and that helps give it depth. If I tried to connect every stem and have it come down perfectly all the way down to the bottom, that really wouldn't look right. So now I will do like I always do, and I'll just let it sit for a couple of days, and I'll look over it and think about if I want to change anything. So I think that I will probably put this on my website. I'm listing my website address right now. And if you go to my website, you'll see a lot of free information, patterns for home decor. And I would consider this a home decor painting because I created it intentionally for my kitchen. And you can see that I have some little areas here where I maybe touched it with my finger or something, but I think that's fine. I like that. That kind of helps bring this up. It was probably an accident, but it helps bring the eye this way. And yet there's this piece over here too. So overall, I'm really happy with it. I think it's very pretty. Okay, and looking at this further, I can tell what's bothering me now. This is very 3D. I don't know how well it shows up in the video here, but it really stands up off the page, and yet the stem really does not at all. And so there's this sudden disjoint between the flower part at the top and the stem. So I'm going to tie that together a little bit better. This needed to be coming up from the back. I didn't really want it coming up from the front here, so I have to keep that in mind as well. Okay, this is just about dry enough to work with. It's a little soft still, but it's all right. So I'm going to take this little fine soft brush, and I've decided to make this pretty much just the burnt sienna, the yellow, and a little bit of this unbleached titanium white. Now, another thing that I did off camera is I used my little dotting tool to add a few little dots up here. There comes a time when you just need to let it be. And I think I'm there now. So this is the new finished painting after adding that little bit there. I'm really quite happy with it. Now I like the overall composition. There's just enough going on to be interesting, but not too busy. Thank you for watching my video, and please remember to subscribe.